And so again, if you're just joining us, thank you so much. This is the Mickey Hart Book Club discussion with Dennis Liu, who's the Vice President of Education for the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation. We are so grateful to have you with us here today. We also have one of their ambassadors. Erica is with us also, who will be telling us a little bit about how this works in the real world for the rest of us. So we're excited to spend this half an hour together. And I actually think we're almost ready to dive in. So let's do that. Hello, everyone. Let's go to speaker view. Hi, Eric. Hi, Stella. Hi, everyone that's joining us today. If you'd like to turn your video on, you're more than welcome to, then we can all see each other. If not, you can leave your video off if you're more comfortable. And Dennis, let's get started by turning it over to you. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you found your way to doing this work with the E.O. Wilson Foundation.
Well, first of all, I'll say I was inspired by Ed, in fact, at a pretty early age. I think I was in high school when Ed Wilson's name came to my attention. I ended up pursuing a career in science, but it was really a molecular genetics type of training. And then I ended up doing science education, and I did science education broadly across the life sciences. And then the last few years started focusing more and more, I like to say, sort of, when you look up from your microscope and you look out the window, what do you see? And I just think it's a great time in both science and education to be looking out the window and trying to understand all the complexity that's going on outside. So that was the opportunity that presented itself to help the foundation form its education programs and to think about, how do we take Ed's ideas and how do we take the goals of the conservation movement in general and how do we make that meaningful in an education context? That's what really excited me about starting to work for the foundation. And so far so good. It's been a couple years now. And our program, it's a great time because you can really see things flowering. Early on, you have to do a lot of planning and really kind of starting from, Ed has always had great impact on education and his books have influenced people, but that's different than doing things that, turning those ideas into things that teachers and students can actually use in their classrooms or that informal educators can use at nature centers and things like that. So.
Or even for lay people that aren't necessarily scientists or teachers to be able to understand. I've noticed that as I've been reading his book and in some of my conversations with Mickey, and that leads us kind of to our first question, which really talks about how Ed has a way of framing these big complex ideas and bringing them down to the rest of us where we can understand them, right, to help inspire us. And how does he do that? How do you take such complex subjects and make them easy to understand for people?
Yeah, if I had the answer to that, I might have a couple of Pulitzer Prizes under my belt as well. But one of the things that's remarkable about Ed is his thinking is obviously of the highest quality, and then he has those he has the science chops, right? So he's walked the talk, and yet he is absolutely unusual among scientists. Many scientists write books, but he has this ability to write, poetically about things. And so, I think what I'm struck by is, Ed is obviously a person of a certain generation. He writes plainly, but in a somewhat learned tone. And yet I find that young people, all sorts of people really respond to that. So his writing it feels like an invitation to come in and think about things. And it has a really good way of sort of presenting his understanding first and then backing in a little so that you can follow his thinking. And some of what we do in the education programs is then to look under the hood even a little deeper because, there's serious work going on in classrooms and there's obviously a place for reading books and being inspired, but you also have to do things that are linked to specific curriculum goals. And so if I can tie some of Ed's poetic writing and thinking, if I can find ways to inspire teachers and draw students in with that, then that's a huge win for us. I'm reading your lips. I think you're saying good things.
To unmute myself. I don't know why that is in 1,000 Zoom meetings. Hold on, I have someone who wants to be also admitted to the chat.
Oh yeah, that's great.
So also for the planet, as you were saying, it's a win-win for the planet and all the species on the planet to have an organization like yours doing this important work. So let's talk a little bit about what is biodiversity and why is it important. We've talked in previous meetings about half-Earth and why half, and kind of been guiding people along that principle. But I think for a lot of people, they really don't understand the true meaning of biodiversity. So we figured maybe you could talk a little bit towards what is that and why is it important?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question, and it's why I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, but it's why I chose chapter 2 as my sort of signature chapter of the book. That chapter deals with why we need a biosphere, and biodiversity is all the living things, some of which are obvious. We're mammals, we're primates. We tend to pay attention to the large animals, but obviously Ed has made a career of trying to understand and point to the importance of all the smaller things that are the basis for our very lives, right? So they're running the planet. We're sort of like, we're lucky to be living off everything that they produce. And so I love chapter 2 of the book because, Ed makes the point, every single species on its own is fragile, right? So we're all interdependent. And and we don't even, obviously we haven't even counted, let alone named all the millions of species on the planet, let alone understanding the relationships that produce this biosphere, again, that the human population is completely dependent on. So it's all of those organisms, all the plants, all the insects, and the microbes who are doing all this work, very shallowly understood by science, very shallowly understood by us. But we know enough to know that if we pull the wrong threads and we start losing this, the total fabric becomes too thin, we're going to lose these processes that we depend on. And then, but I'd also like to note, there's just a pure joy in understanding biodiversity. I have to say that's what drew me into science in the first place, is that drive to try and understand how things work. And the more you learn, the more questions you have, the more answers you get, the more delightful it gets. And so if like Ed, you're trying to understand all of biodiversity, how does it all work? It's just such an enormous, complex problem. And it's a great time to be trying to understand it. At the same time, we're concerned about its erosion and about losing it. Yeah. And one other thing about the book, it's a culmination of Ed's, he's had, I forget, I'm going to get the number wrong, it's 20 some books. And Half-Earth really encapsulates a lot of ideas that he's written about over the years.
It reminds me of, when I was a child and you would be afraid of bees. And my mother was like, you realize that bees give you half the fruit you love in the refrigerator, Rachel. So as a child, just being able to connect, the process of pollination to the fact that half the stuff in my refrigerator or the things that you like, not only taught me a little bit more about the things that you can't see in the world, but really made me unafraid of bees. So I think it's just interesting, when she was like, this came from them, or without them, you wouldn't have this. So she had a really nice way of getting me interested in science. My dad was a scientist. He was a computer scientist. He invented motherboards and computer chips and all sorts of weird things. So my mom also was very interested in keeping us scientific. So she always tried to connect our daily lives back to some unseen process of the world.
Well, I love those stories of people being inspired. Often it's a generational transfer. I really like that. I also really like your example of bees, because that's a great example of biodiversity. So I think people are aware that there's a crisis among bees. You know, there's colony collapse disorder, but you know, that's affecting essentially one species of bee that's been introduced to our landscape. So part of what Half-Earth Project and the foundation and biodiversity is about is all those other bees, the non-domestic bees. So I think it's great. It's a great story of how you can overcome people. Some people have a bit of a yuck factor over some of the organisms that are out there, or even fear. But bees are a great example. We don't, you know, there's hundreds of native species to North America, and they're much more at risk than the domestic bees that we depend on for pollination in agriculture.
Very super interesting. And I love that you brought up chapter 2. I don't want to jump ahead, but when you talked about that, we had gone through, and I really would just like to read this quote to everyone just because it really moved me. And it was one thing. So since you were talking about the biosphere and biodiversity, I love where he talks about how we belong to the biosphere and not the other way around. And sometimes I think as the dominant species on the planet, we might forget that. So I love how he says this. Ed says, human beings are not exempt from the iron law of species interdependency. We were not inserted as ready-made invasives into an endemic world, nor we were intended by Providence to rule that world. The biosphere does not belong to us. We belong to it. The organisms that surround us in such beautiful profusion are the product of 3.8 billion years of evolution. And I just love the picture that paints about our place in the universe. And, you know, not that we should feel small, but it's nice to feel small sometimes, you know, and realize you're part of a bigger picture. So in continuing, by the way, if you have questions, please do put them in the chat. And once we're done, we'll go through all of the questions in the chat. So that's the right place to put the questions that you have. Or if you're following us live on Facebook, you can go ahead and put your questions in the comments. We do have someone moderating the comments as well. So let's talk about how you're adjusting to the new ways of teaching and a little bit about the teaching process that you use for these programs, and how is, you know, you had to change things to reach this broad audience in this new normal that we're facing.
Right. Well, the overall goal for my education programs, and I would say our efforts maybe are centered on high school level education, but we do a lot of work with middle school teachers and students and into the college level. And you know, the overall goal is to find ways, and there's a thirst for this out in the teaching community, to find ways to bring biodiversity and conservation into the classroom. You know, there's not typically, you know, there's not room for necessarily a whole chapter on that if you think about how crowded the curriculum is. So we're trying to identify teachers who are keen to do this and then build up a community. So a central thing has been to build a community of Half-Earth Project Educator Ambassadors. And I'm happy to say we have going on 500 of these ambassadors who have signed up. We always hope we're reaching more than that. I know from lots of experience of doing this work, you really, if you can do it, you want to do workshops and institutes. You want hands-on experience where you're helping teachers work through how they might use materials and resources, how they might teach teach in their own classroom. But to get scale, you also have to do things online. So we had all those things lined up, and then of course, the pandemic hit. It really changed everything. And you know, you don't like to talk about it this way, really, but in a sense, it's been an opportunity to really double down and focus on the online work. And we've been adding lots of resources to our website. I think we'll probably post the resource page to the chat as well. People can go check out the resources that we're sharing. And you know, so it's been a great opportunity. It's also been a good opportunity to have conversations with people who might not have had as much time under the previous circumstances. So we've recorded some great video chats with everything from expert master teachers like Erica, who's going to join us, who's going to comment at the end, but also, you know, folks who are making major contributions to this question of, you know, what can I do now to help support biodiversity? So it's been a great opportunity to do that. And then again, in the education setting, I always kind of compare it to journalism. You know, in the case of journalism, you can write something, you put it out there, and there's a form of learning or influence, you hope, from the readers of that. Well, in education, you kind of have to take a step past that, right? So how do you foster a discussion around an article? How do you place a video into the context of other things where you're more confident that you're going to get learning as a result of interacting with that material? And of course, it's completely dependent on giving teachers the tools and helping them to be the best teachers they can be. And luckily, we just have some absolutely amazing teachers out there. And you know, kids are spending a lot of time in school. So why not spend more of that time thinking about the fate of the planet and understanding the place of biodiversity?
I think that's a perfect place to bring in Erica, as you're talking about creating these ambassadors and other advocates that are out there in the world doing great work for you. So I think this would actually be a great time to introduce Erica. Maybe you want to go in a little deeper about the ambassador program that Erica is a part of, and then we can turn it over to you, Erica, to tell us a little bit about how you found the ambassador program, what attracted you to it, and how you've incorporated it into your life. So Dennis, what exactly is the ambassador program in a little more detail?
Yeah, so the program started with, again, this intention to get more conservation biology, biodiversity into the curriculum. So to begin with, I had to identify a small cohort of teachers who would help us design some materials. And we knew that we have the Half-Earth map, which is this amazing digital tool. And that's a really good trend going on in science education today, which is to use real data, real research tools. Why don't create sort of like fake or dumbed down things for the classroom. Help guide students and teachers into using real tools. So that's where we started. Use the Half-Earth map, find ways to bring in students and teachers to, and one of the things we did was, first things we did was make a hands-on activity. So I met Erica in one of the workshops that we did where we were presenting this. Erica's one of those, you know, great teachers who of course picked up the materials, made them her own. I just want to say a couple things. Erica's one of those people that I recorded with her and one of her colleagues, Jonathan Bauer, we recorded a session talking about the work they're doing as teachers in the Galapagos. Erica is, she's won a bunch of prestigious awards. So she's, you know, we're just really lucky to have her part of the community. And I think with that, I would just maybe turn it over to Erica to you know, make some comments about, you know, what I got wrong in that history I just spilled out. How are you doing, Erica? It's great to see you.
I'm doing well. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that introduction. You flattered me way too much, especially after this difficult spring of, you know, learning all sorts of new things, teaching online. It's been definitely a challenge for teachers all over the country. But yeah, I mean, I teach high school. I teach high school biology, and I also teach an upperclassman elective that's called Science, Ethics, and Society, where we like learn about ethical issues that are having an impact in the world today and the scientific ramifications. And I've been able to use the Half-Earth map and Half-Earth activities in both of those classes this year, and very, very interesting kind of to see the different reactions from the different age groups. You know, I teach 14 and 15-year-olds as well as 18 and 19-year-olds. And even that small age, they have quite a different reaction to it. But just as what Dennis was saying, as educators, we're really, at least I can speak for myself in this, that we're really not looking for more, you know, formulaic worksheets. We're not looking for more textbook problems at this point. We're looking for stuff that students can actually connect to because they're very savvy, they're very literate. They know there are big environmental and ecological problems in the world. But a lot of them just feel a little bit helpless, like, what am I supposed to do about this? I'm only 15 and I don't have concrete ideas or solutions. And, when I go around the table with my students, they all agree we should be doing something, but they're just not sure what that is. So the activity Dennis was mentioning, the Half-Earth activity, it's much more complicated than this, but essentially it gives students data via the maps, and it asks them, if we were to take 50% of the United States and set that aside as protected land, which 50% should it be? And the students have to come up with their own maps and their own justifications about why certain parcels of land should be conserved. And it leads to some really interesting discussions and very different results. And I've had great success using it in my class. And as I said, students are very smart and they can tell when things are relevant and meaningful and tangible, and they can tell when they're just kind of going through the motions to learn some vocabulary. And this is definitely more activities that feel tangible and real to them.
Sounds like the Half-Earth Project has really created a way for you to engage your students. And I think that's really important in learning, is if you can keep people engaged, you keep them interested, you keep them excited, they keep that thirst for knowledge coming back and back because they want to know more and they want to discover more. Erica, when you were a student and studying science and things, and maybe before you came to know of Dr. Wilson's work, was biodiversity talked about a lot in curriculum or when you were in school, or have you noticed a shift in that being more important as a scientific concept and taught more often and things like that?
That's a great question. I always say to my students, it's kind of a miracle that I became a science teacher, because my science classes at school were actually some of my least favorite classes. Just because in science classes, I wasn't expected to speak most of the time. It was mostly just the teacher talking and you just absorbing the information and getting the correct results in the lab and then moving on. And the classes I really was struck by was, English classes, history classes, art classes, where you got to, work with other people and collaborate and have discussions about things that felt meaningful. But I ended up majoring in science, specifically ecology, mostly because I grew up here in New England, and I spent a lot of time outdoors in Maine, in the woods, just going around the lakes and exploring the species. And I remember clearly reading books about it and thinking, oh my God, people do this for a living. They understand nature for a living. That's what I want to do. So it came to me as quite a separate thing from formal education. And now that I'm in formal education, I'm trying to be more intentional about bringing that sense of, curiosity and wonder directly to my students within the confines of a classroom.
And it sounds great. Dennis, it sounds like the programs that you've developed are helping teachers address exactly that, how to keep their students engaged, how to make learning more fun, and maybe change from my generation, where, again, I agree with you, Eric, it wasn't interesting. The most interesting thing I think they used to do was wheel in the AV cart so they could show us some kind of PBS special on the TV. And I remember those being my favorite, times when they came in. But I think learning has definitely changed, and it's great to see that there are organizations adapting to that and providing tools for people and teachers like yourself to help complete this.
I could make just a couple of quick comments. One is that these sort of activities are exactly what we need to serve diverse learners. There's all sorts of reasons kids are disengaged, but when you challenge them to find their own way and to design their own solutions, that responds to a broad diversity of learners. So it's a much more inclusive way to do things. And also, one of our goals is absolutely, again, to have the national and even international reach we want to have. We can't be every place at once. And we're not trying to replace the essential outdoor experiences. But if we can be a complement to those outdoor experiences, if a kid comes back from some interaction with nature, motivated to deepen their understanding of it, we want to be there to help with that. So that's another big part of the program goal.
We have a few minutes left. We try to stay on time and respect everybody's time. Don't mind if we run a little over, but we have some questions. So Erica, thank you so much for telling us a little bit about yourself and for all the work that you're doing and spreading the good word and doing the good work with your students. And quick shout out to all the teachers everywhere and all the parents who have become teachers, and just for all of you that have had to shift what you've known. You're all doing a great job. So everyone else on the planet really appreciates all the hard work. So a couple quick questions, Dennis, that have come in for you. This one is from Stella. And she asks, how do you see biodiversity in the urban spaces? Example, in biophilic cities in the context of Half-Earth.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, there's like a renaissance in urban biodiversity studies. I mean, I think the first thing to point out is that, for example, in Europe, some of the richest biodiversity, in fact, is in and around cities because those settlements have been there for so long and they've modified the countryside so much that, in fact, the city has a true richness in biodiversity. Also, for all sorts of reasons, there's a renaissance in citizen science, and urban settings are really good. They're high density in a lot of ways, and you can get around cities, and so they're very good opportunities for doing citizen science. It's also, it's really interesting the way, most kids will assume that there is no, that in their urban setting, there isn't a lot of biodiversity, that nature is somewhere else. So although we need to protect, we can go too far with urbanization. It's an important aspect of thinking, how do we live with nature, and how do we, can we find ways to value whatever species and biodiversity we have right here, understanding that it's going to be different across the globe, and that we should find ways to connect and understand all of it. Most students live in urban areas, so we have got to find ways to reach them. And again, I think our map is a great example of that. The Half-Earth map allows you to explore biodiversity wherever you happen to be and look at the broader global patterns and compare it to any other place you'd like to on the planet. So
it's a very cool tool. So the next question is from N Ball, which I'm gathering, I don't want to guess your first name. Hello, nice to see you. Thank you. Actually, let me unmute you. Nancy? Oh, I unmuted you, you muted. So anyway, so her question is two parts. Does the Half-Earth Project connect with the UN Initiative for Education and Sustainable Development or the Earth Charter Initiative?
The easiest answer is to say we don't have any direct partnership. We make every effort to connect to all these, I mean, it's a good point. The more general point is we're not the only people working on this. I think we offer some unique perspectives and unique ways of looking at these problems. And we hope to really be an umbrella organization. And I think our particular focus on education is a little, we're very deep and rigorous in the way that we're approaching education. We don't look at it as, the term outreach, which kind of means, well, I have some core activity and on the side, we want it to trickle out to the community a little bit. So I would finish my comments by saying I want to know about any efforts and any materials that would be of interest to our ambassador community and the broader community. If you have connections there, I would love to hear about them. To round that out, we have partnerships with lots of different organizations, but no formal partnership with the couple that you mentioned there. You're muted again.
One more question. She says, also, how do invasive species fit into the vision? Thank you, Nadine. This will be the last question. You can always follow up by submitting any questions in the chat or in the Facebook comments. And Chris and the engagement team over at the foundation are happy to respond and engage and get you excited. So we'll close out with this last question and then some ideas about what you can do in your daily life to help spread the word, get your schools involved. So Dennis, why don't you answer that last question and then speak a little bit about the next step. So how do invasive species fit into the vision?
Well, it's a great question, you know, and in the more apocalyptic version of what happens as we lose the healthy biodiversity and the balanced ecosystem that they provide and all of those functions and services, as you erode that, that is just a great opportunity for invasives to come in. And in the extreme examples, the invasives can take over and push everything else out and accelerate extinction of native species. And you know, it really relates to what we're experiencing right now with this pandemic. Globalization and human behaviors and activities has meant we're just moving species around in a way that we did not, you know, in an unprecedented way, even compared to 30 or 40 years ago. But it's also a great opportunity to just mention very practical things about what you can do. It absolutely helps wherever you live to plant and foster native species. It absolutely helps to volunteer, to find the organizations that are removing invasive species. And it's hard work, but it's extremely gratifying work. You know, if you check out most nature centers, for example, almost every nature center is in sort of an attractive nature reserve of some sort, and almost all of them need to restore native species in that relatively good habitat, and they need to get rid of invasives. So, so invasives are a huge part of this. And that's a segue into a few other things you could do.
So unfortunately, Dennis, I feel like we could talk about this forever, but we try to respect everyone's time and allot for a specific half an hour. We're going to put some next steps in the chat and some next steps in the comments on Facebook that you can take by spreading the word to your schools and talking to your kids that can go to their teachers and talk about the fun things. They have a lot of tools for you to use in connection, and they really help you along the way. We work with a lot of organizations, and sometimes, you know, the outreach, but they are solid on the outreach, super committed. So if you do know a teacher or a professor or a science chair, feel free to introduce them or make the connection or send them to the website. And I promise you, they will be well taken care of and provided with incredible tools to help your students learn. So we really appreciate all of you joining us today, and we hope you're enjoying reading our book. And we're going to have one more of these talks before our big book club discussion that we're very excited about, which will be on June 10th, which is also Dr. Wilson's birthday. So we are excited. We have a panel discussion. It will be an hour long, so we'll have plenty of time to dive in, and we hope to see you all there. So continue reading, continue doing good work in the world, and being kind to each other. And Erica, thank you so much for joining us and for representing the program and being an ambassador for good. I hope we have many, many more of you all across the world. And Dennis and Chris, thank you so much for putting this together. And
thank you, Rachel Ann. Thanks so much.
You guys have a great weekend and a lovely Friday.
Yep.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.